October 2012. A massive Argentine military ship sits peacefully docked at a port in West Africa. Over 300 sailors are on board, resting during a routine international training mission. Suddenly, local authorities board the ship. Armed with legal documents, they chain the massive vessel to the dock. The ship is officially detained. It is not allowed to leave the harbor. But this is not an act of war by an enemy nation. This military vessel was legally seized by a private billionaire hedge fund manager from New York. How does a single private investor seize a piece of a sovereign military? The answer lies in a broken promise from 11 years earlier, a promise worth $95 billion. This bizarre event perfectly captures the hidden reality of a national financial collapse. When a country goes broke, the consequences do not just disappear after a few rough years. They do not wash away with a new election. They become a ghost that haunts the nation across decades, oceans, and generations. To understand how an entire nation ends up with its military ships held hostage by Wall Street, we have to go back to a time when Argentina felt like the richest and most stable country in South America. In the early 1990s, Argentina was fighting a terrifying domestic enemy: inflation. Prices were rising so fast that money literally lost its value on the short walk from the bank to the grocery store. Citizens were desperate for stability and exhausted by the chaos. So, the government made a bold, seemingly brilliant decision. They passed a law stating that from that day forward, one Argentine peso would always be worth exactly $1 US. They tied their local money directly to the strongest economy on earth. Think of the global economy like a massive, unpredictable ocean. The United States is a giant cruise ship, cutting through the heavy waves smoothly, largely unaffected by the weather. Argentina, at the time, was a smaller wooden boat, constantly being tossed around by the storms of inflation and political instability. By legally pegging the peso to the dollar, Argentina essentially took a massive steel chain and tied their small wooden boat to the giant cruise ship. Suddenly, the ride was incredibly smooth. The local storm stopped mattering. For the people of Argentina, it felt like an absolute economic miracle. An average worker earning pesos could suddenly buy imported cars, travel to Miami for vacations, and purchase homes, all because their money was artificially granted the exact same purchasing power as the American dollar. Foreign investors looked at this sudden, beautiful stability and started pouring billions of dollars into the country. But there is a hidden, fatal danger in tying a small boat to a massive ship. You no longer control where you are going. And if a storm hits that, the big ship can easily survive, but the small boat cannot. The big ship will simply drag the smaller one underwater. To keep the peso exactly equal to the dollar, the Argentine government had to actually hold enough real US dollars in their central bank vaults to back up the illusion. For every peso in circulation, they needed a dollar to prove it was worth something. Since Argentina could not print US dollars, there was only one way to get them. They had to borrow them. And borrow. And borrow. Throughout the 1990s, the government borrowed tens of billions from international investors just to keep the party going. They were not borrowing this money to build factories, invest in technology, or create new industries that would generate future wealth. They were borrowing massive amounts of cash simply to maintain the illusion that they were already wealthy. By the year 2001, the illusion finally broke. The global economy slowed down. Investors around the world looked at Argentina's massive mountain of debt and realized a simple, terrifying mathematical truth. The country was not actually generating enough real money to pay the debt back. The panic started quietly, as financial panics always do. A few large international investors stopped lending new money. Without new money coming in, the government could not pay the old debts. Then, the ordinary citizens realized what was happening. If the government ran out of dollars, the peso would no longer be protected. It would become worthless again. So, regular people rushed to the banks to pull their money out and convert it to physical cash before it was too late. This is the absolute worst nightmare for any financial system. A bank run. The money simply was not there. The government panicked. To stop the banks from completely collapsing and running out of cash in a matter of hours, the government did the unthinkable. They locked the doors. They froze the bank accounts of almost every citizen in the country. This devastating move became known as the corralito, or the little playpen. Overnight, Millions of hardworking people were entirely locked out of their own life savings. They could only withdraw a tiny, strictly limited amount of cash each week, which was barely enough to buy basic food. The wealth of the middle class was effectively destroyed in a single day. Trust in the system evaporated completely. The streets of Buenos Aires filled with angry, desperate people, banging pots and pans outside the locked doors of the banks. The protests quickly turned into violent riots. Supermarkets were looted. The country descended into absolute chaos. In a span of just 2 weeks, as the streets burned and the economy flatlined, Argentina had 5 different presidents. They kept taking the job and resigning days later as the country collapsed around them. Finally, in the last days of December 2001, the government stood before the world and admitted the truth. They announced they could not and would not pay their $95 billion in foreign debt. The money was gone. It was the largest sovereign default in the history of the world. When a normal company goes bankrupt, there is a clear, logical, legal process. A bankruptcy court steps in, fires the management, sells off the company's assets, gives whatever money is left to the lenders, and the company disappears forever. The process is painful, but it is final. Everyone knows the rules. But there is no global bankruptcy court for countries. You cannot liquidate a nation. You cannot sell a country's hospitals, its public roads, or its citizens to pay off Wall Street investors. You cannot dissolve a country. So what happens instead? A financial standoff. After the default, Argentina was a global outcast. Most of the everyday people, pension funds, and banks who had lent them money realized they were never getting it all back. Years later, Argentina offered these desperate lenders a harsh deal. They basically said, "We will pay you roughly 30 cents for every dollar you originally gave us, and that is our final offer. Take it or leave it." The vast majority of investors, about 93%, looked at the hopeless situation and took the deal. They accepted the massive loss, known in the financial world as a haircut, and tried to move on with their lives. But a very small, very powerful group of aggressive hedge funds did the math differently. These firms are often referred to in the press as vulture funds, because their entire business model relies on circling, dying, distressed economies waiting to feed on the remains. These specific hedge funds had not originally lent money to Argentina during the good times. Instead, right after the default, when everyone else was panicking and trying to sell their Argentine bonds for anything they could get, these funds stepped in. They bought the unpaid debt from desperate investors for pennies on the dollar. They bought the legal rights to collect the full, original amount. And when Argentina offered the 30-cent compromise, these funds absolutely refused to take it. They wanted 100 cents on the dollar, plus years of accumulated interest. Because there is no international bankruptcy judge to force a minority of investors to accept a compromise, these hedge funds went to a federal judge in New York, which was exactly where the original debt contracts were legally registered. The judge looked at the contracts and agreed with the hedge funds. Argentina had signed a legal document promising to pay. Therefore, Argentina legally owed them the money. This single legal ruling set off one of the most bizarre and relentless financial chases in modern history. The hedge funds hired armies of aggressive lawyers and private investigators to hunt down Argentine government assets anywhere in the world. They were looking for anything they could legally seize to force payment. They tried to seize money from Argentina's central bank that was temporarily being held in foreign accounts. They tried to legally intercept the money Argentina was trying to pay to the normal investors who had accepted the compromise deal. And, as we saw at the very beginning of this story, they even managed to get a local court order in Ghana to chain an Argentine military training ship to a dock. The strategy was brutal, legal, and highly calculated. They wanted to make daily life so incredibly painful, embarrassing, and complicated for the Argentine government that paying the debt would eventually become easier than fighting it. But Argentina refused to surrender. Successive politicians made it a point of fierce national pride to never pay a single cent to these specific hedge funds, publicly labeling them as financial extortionists. This created a bitter political standoff that lasted for more than a decade. But while the politicians gave angry speeches on television and the wealthy lawyers fought over technicalities in New York courtrooms, the ordinary citizens of Argentina were quietly trapped in a financial prison. Because the country was in active defiance of a United States court order regarding its debt, Argentina was completely locked out of the global financial system. They could not borrow money from international markets to build new infrastructure. fund social programs, or stabilize their battered economy. No major bank or country would risk lending to them while the New York judge's order was hanging over their heads. A government still has to pay its daily bills, even if no one in the world will lend it money. It still has to pay its public school teachers, its police officers, its doctors, and its pension funds. So, completely locked out of global credit, the Argentine government resorted to the only financial tool it had left in its arsenal: the printing press. They started printing massive, unbelievable amounts of domestic paper currency just to pay for their daily domestic expenses. But economics has unbreakable rules. When a government prints money without creating any new goods, services, or economic value to back it up, the existing money simply becomes worth less and less. This is the mechanical, inescapable reality of inflation. Because of a high-level legal dispute over a fraction of their original defaulted debt, the government triggered a multi-decade cycle of brutal, suffocating inflation that completely crushed the working and middle class. The reality on the ground became a daily nightmare for normal people. Prices in the grocery store would double, and then double again a few months later. People entirely lost the ability to save money for the future. If a worker earned their salary on a Friday, they had to go to the store and spend it immediately, because by Monday, that exact same physical cash would buy less bread and milk. Buying a house, planning for retirement, or starting a small business became mathematically impossible because no one knew what the currency would be worth the following month. The government tried to fix the problem by ordering grocery stores to freeze prices, restricting imported goods, and legally banning citizens from buying US dollars. But these actions were just tiny bandages slapped onto a bleeding artery. The root cause remained exactly the same. The country was financially isolated from the rest of the world. The people on the streets were suffering the long-term, daily punishment of that $95 billion mistake made back in 2001. It took until the year 2016, 15 long years after the original default, for a newly elected Argentine government to finally admit defeat, sit down, and pay the hedge funds billions of dollars just to make the lawsuits go away. It was a bitter, humiliating pill for the nation to swallow, but the politicians realized it was the only possible way to finally re-enter the global economy and stop the bleeding. Yet, the damage was already done, and it was permanently woven into the psychology and fabric of the society. When you look closely at how sovereign debt actually works beneath the surface, you realize something profound about money, power, and consequence. If you, as an individual citizen, default on a personal loan, your punishment is a ruined credit score that goes away after 7 years. If a massive corporation defaults on its debt, its punishment is liquidation. Its assets are sold to the highest bidder, the name is erased, and the company ceases to exist. But a country cannot cease to exist. A nation must continue to wake up every single morning, turn on the lights, and try to function. So when a country defaults, its punishment is something much worse than simple bankruptcy or liquidation. Its punishment is time. The ultimate, true cost of the 2001 default was not the billions of dollars lost by wealthy investors on Wall Street. The true cost was a 20-year financial prison built on international isolation, hyperinflation, and daily desperation. The financial debt eventually got settled in a courtroom, but an entire generation of normal citizens paid the ultimate price, watching their futures, their life savings, and their best decades slowly slip away to pay for an illusion they never truly owned. If you learned something new today, subscribe for more real money stories.